So many people are carrying the weight of their future, their struggles, and their unanswered prayers on their shoulders. They stay up late, trying to figure things out, worrying about what's next. But let me tell you something. God is already working. He is moving in ways you can't see, shifting things in the background, aligning the right people, the right opportunities, and the right breakthroughs. You don't have to stress. You don't have to force things to happen. You just have to rest. Because the one who holds your future is already making a way. Life has a way of making us feel like nothing is happening. You pray, you believe, you do everything you know to do, yet things remain the same. The situation doesn't change. The breakthrough you're expecting doesn't come. The door you need to open remains shut, and in those moments, doubt creeps in. You start questioning, is God really working? Does He even see what I'm going through? This is where many people lose faith. They look at their situation and assume that because they can't see progress, there is no progress. But this is where faith comes in. Faith is not about seeing, it's about trusting. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. God is working behind the scenes in ways beyond your understanding. Think about a seed planted in the ground. When you bury a seed, it disappears from sight. You water it, you wait, but for days, even weeks, there's no visible sign of life. If you didn't understand the process, you might assume nothing is happening. But under the soil, the seed is changing. It's breaking apart, sending out roots, forming the foundation that will eventually support the plant. The moment of visible growth will come, but first, there's unseen work taking place. God works the same way in your life. He is moving in the unseen. He is aligning opportunities, preparing people, orchestrating events that will lead to your breakthrough. But because you can't see it, the temptation is to assume He's silent, inactive, or distant. The truth is, God is never inactive. He neither sleeps nor slumbers. His hand is always at work, even in the silence. One of the greatest examples of this is in the life of Joseph. Joseph had a dream of greatness, a vision from God about his future. But what happened after that? Instead of immediate promotion, Joseph was thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. It seemed as if everything was going wrong, but what Joseph couldn't see at the time was that God was working. Every setback was a setup for something greater. Every delay was part of the divine plan. When the time was right, God lifted him from the prison to the palace in a single day. If Joseph had judged God's faithfulness based on his circumstances, he would have given up. But the truth was, God was working all along. He was moving people, shifting situations, preparing the right time for Joseph's promotion. And the same is true for you. Maybe you've been praying for healing, but your health hasn't improved. Maybe you've been believing for a financial breakthrough, but your bank account looks the same. Maybe you've been asking God to restore a broken relationship, but there's been no change. In moments like these, the enemy wants you to focus on what you see, to convince you that God has abandoned you. But faith is about believing beyond what your eyes can perceive. Consider how God works in nature. The sun rises each morning without your effort. The tides shift, the seasons change, the earth rotates perfectly. All without you controlling a thing. If God can keep the universe in order, don't you think He's working in your life? One of the biggest mistakes we make is trying to figure everything out. We try to calculate how God will do it, when He will do it, through whom He will do it. But God doesn't operate on human logic. He doesn't need a visible way to make things happen. When the Israelites were trapped at the Red Sea, there was no visible solution. They couldn't see a bridge, a boat, or any escape route. But just because they didn't see a way didn't mean God wasn't working in an instant. He parted the waters and made a dry path appear. That's the nature of God. He doesn't need something to create something. He speaks and it comes to pass. He opens doors no man can shut. He makes ways in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Your responsibility is not to figure out how He will do it. Your responsibility is to trust that He will. Think about a child traveling in a car with their parents. The child doesn't ask if the road is open or if the car has enough fuel. They just sit back, enjoy the ride, and trust that their parents will take them where they need to go. That's the level of trust God wants from us. He wants us to rest in the truth that He is driving our lives, and He knows exactly where we're headed. It's easy to trust God when we see results. It's easy to have faith when the doors open quickly, but real trust is built in the waiting. It's in those moments of silence, when nothing seems to be happening, that your faith is truly tested. Will you believe that God is working even when you don't see it? Look back at your life. There were moments when you thought things weren't going to work out, times when you didn't see a way forward. Yet, somehow, things changed. Doors opened, breakthroughs came. Not because you made it happen, but because God was working behind the scenes all along. Right now, you may be in a waiting season. You may be wondering when your breakthrough will come, but let me remind you, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. God is working. He is setting things in motion. And at the right time, what has been happening in the unseen will become visible. Your job is to stay in faith. Keep believing, keep trusting, keep resting in the assurance that God is faithful. He has never failed before, and He won't start now. The seed is in the ground. The roots are forming. And when the time is right, you will see the fruit of what God has been doing all along. So don't get discouraged. Don't lose hope. You're closer than you think. The same God who worked behind the scenes in the past is working in your life right now. And when His plan unfolds, you will see that every delay, every closed door, and every silent season was leading you to something greater. Many people carry burdens they were never meant to bear. They worry about their future, stress over situations they can't control, and try to solve problems that only God can handle. The weight of uncertainty, fear, and doubt can be overwhelming. Yet God's message is clear. Rest, trust that He is in control. Surrender your worries and let Him work in your life. When you try to carry everything on your own, it leads to exhaustion. You overthink, you struggle, and you fight battles that are not yours to fight. But God never intended for you to live like that. He calls you to release your burdens to Him. When you rest in Him, you are not giving up. You are positioning yourself for His power to move in your life. Think about a farmer who plants a seed. He does his part, preparing the soil, planting and watering, but after that, he cannot force the seed to grow. He trusts the process. He knows that growth happens in the unseen. In the same way, when you've done what you can, it's time to step back and trust God. Worrying won't make things move faster. Stress won't open the right door. But resting in faith will position you to receive what God has prepared for you. One of the greatest challenges people face is letting go of control. Human nature wants to know every detail, how things will happen, when they will change, and what the outcome will be. But faith doesn't work like that. Faith means trusting God even when you don't have all the answers. It means believing that He is moving even when you don't see it. Look at the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. God provided manna for them every morning, but He gave them just enough for each day. They had to trust that more would come tomorrow. Some tried to store extra out of fear that God wouldn't provide again, but it spoiled. Why? Because God wanted them to learn daily dependence. He wanted them to rest in the assurance that He would take care of them. The same is true today. You may not see how things will work out, but God already has a plan. He is working behind the scenes, arranging things in your favor. Your responsibility is not to stress over the details, but to trust Him in the process. The more you rest in His promises, the more peace you will experience. Resting in God is not about inactivity. It's about shifting your focus. Instead of striving, you surrender. Instead of panicking, you pray. Instead of doubting, you declare His promises. This kind of rest isn't about doing nothing. It's about trusting that God is doing something. Imagine a child being carried by their parent. The child doesn't worry about the direction or whether they will be dropped. They simply rest, knowing they are safe. That's the kind of trust God wants from you. He is carrying you through your situation. He knows where you are going. Your job is not to figure everything out, but to rest in His care. Many people are missing their blessings because they are too focused on trying to make things happen in their own strength. They work endlessly, push themselves to exhaustion, and still don't see results. But God's ways are different. He doesn't need your stress. He needs your trust. When you release control, you make room for Him to move. Think about Peter when he was fishing all night. He worked hard, yet he caught nothing. But when Jesus told him to cast his net again, he obeyed. The result? An overwhelming catch of fish. What changed? Peter moved from striving to trusting. He relied on God's word rather than his own effort. The same applies to your life. You may have been struggling, trying to fix everything on your own. But God is asking you to rest, to trust that He knows what He is doing. The moment you stop striving and start trusting, you will see Him move in ways you never expected. Your future is not in your hands, it's in God's hands. Your breakthrough is not something you have to force. It's something God will bring in His perfect timing. When you truly understand this, you can let go of stress. You can sleep at night, knowing that God is working. Right now, He is aligning the right people, opening the right doors, and preparing the right opportunities for you. Just because you don't see it yet doesn't mean it's not happening. You don't have to carry the weight of figuring everything out. That is God's job. Your job is to rest in His promises, knowing that He will bring everything together at the right time. So take a deep breath, let go of the worry, trust that God is in control. He hasn't forgotten you. He hasn't abandoned you. He is working in ways beyond your understanding, and when the time is right, you will see the fulfillment of what He has been preparing all along. There are moments in life when everything seems uncertain. You've prayed, you've believed, but nothing seems to be changing. It's in these moments that doubt begins to creep in, whispering that maybe God isn't listening, maybe He has forgotten about you. But the truth is, just because you don't see immediate changes doesn't mean God is not working. His timing is perfect, and His ways are higher than yours. He is arranging things behind the scenes, preparing the right opportunities, and aligning everything according to His divine plan. Many times, people give up too soon. They start off with faith, trusting that God is moving, but when they don't see quick results, they begin to waver. They think, maybe this isn't for me, or maybe God isn't answering. But God's process often involves seasons of waiting. It is in the waiting that your faith is refined. It is in the waiting that your trust in Him is strengthened. Think about a tree. When you plant a seed, you don't immediately see the growth. Under the soil, the roots are taking hold, establishing a strong foundation before anything appears on the surface. If you judge the progress only by what you see above ground, you might think nothing is happening, but in reality, something powerful is taking place beneath the surface. This is how God works in your life. Just because you don't see the breakthrough doesn't mean it's not happening. The foundation is being laid. The right people are being positioned. The necessary doors are being prepared to open at the right time. It's easy to trust when things are going well. But true faith is built when you can trust, even in silence. When Jesus was asleep in the boat during the storm, his disciples panicked. They thought they were going to drown. But Jesus was at peace because he knew that no storm could overturn the plan of God. He knew that he had authority over the winds and waves. The same is true for your life. Just because you feel like you're in a storm doesn't mean you're alone. God is still in control. He is still working even when you can't see it. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that delays mean denial. When things don't happen as quickly as they want, they get discouraged and stop believing. But delays are often a sign that God is setting something up for your good. Sometimes he withholds what you are asking for because he has something better. Sometimes he makes you wait because he is working on you, strengthening you for what is ahead. Joseph in the Bible was given a dream that he would one day be in a position of great leadership. But before that dream came to pass, he was betrayed, sold into slavery, and thrown into prison. If he had judged his situation by what he saw, he would have thought God had abandoned him. But in reality, God was using every setback as a setup for something greater. The prison was not the end. It was a passage to the palace. In the same way, what may seem like a setback in your life is often preparation for something greater. God knows what he is doing. He sees the whole picture while you only see a piece of it. When you find yourself questioning whether God is working, remind yourself of his faithfulness. Look back on your life and see how he has brought you through situations that once seemed impossible. If he did it before, he will do it again. He is not a God who abandons his people. He is a God who completes what he starts. There is a reason why God doesn't always show you everything at once. If you knew the full plan, you might try to rush ahead, but God's timing is intentional. Every step, every delay, every unexpected turn is part of the process. Trusting him means believing that he knows best, even when you don't understand. Rest in the knowledge that God's hand is on your life. He is moving pieces into place, orchestrating things beyond what you can see. Even in the silence, even in the waiting, he is working. Your job is not to figure everything out, but to trust him, to keep believing, to keep standing in faith. At the right time, in the right season, everything will fall into place, just as he has planned. Waiting on God's timing is one of the hardest things to do, especially when you feel like nothing is changing. You pray, you believe, you do everything you can, yet the situation remains the same. The silence can feel discouraging, and the waiting can feel endless. But just because you don't see immediate results doesn't mean God isn't working. His timing is always perfect, and when you learn to trust it, you will find peace in the process. God does not operate on human timelines. He sees the full picture when you only see a small part. You may feel like you're ready for the breakthrough, but he knows what's ahead. He knows when the right moment is, and he is preparing you just as much as he is preparing the blessing. If something hasn't happened yet, it's not because God has forgotten you. It's because the appointed time hasn't come. And when that moment arrives, nothing will be able to stop it. Many times, the waiting season feels like a delay, but in reality, it is divine preparation. God is strengthening your faith, shaping your character, and teaching you to rely on him. Think about Joseph in the Bible. He had a dream that he would one day be in a position of leadership, yet he was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and imprisoned before he ever saw that dream come to pass. It took years before he walked into his destiny, but in the waiting, God was preparing him. The hardships he faced were not a sign that God's plan had failed. They were part of the process. When you rush ahead of God's timing, you may step into something you are not fully prepared for. A premature blessing can become a burden. Sometimes God is not just working on your circumstances, He is working on you. He is refining you, strengthening your faith, and teaching you things that will sustain you when the blessing finally comes. If you received everything you wanted instantly, you might not have the wisdom to handle it well. God's delays are not denials. They are divine setups for something greater than you imagined. Waiting is not just about patience, it's about trust. It's about believing that God's plan is better than anything you could orchestrate on your own. When you trust His timing, you stop striving. You stop stressing over when things will change. You stop comparing your journey to others. Instead, you find rest in knowing that your story is unfolding exactly as it should. Think about a puzzle. If you only see one piece, it may not make sense. But when all the pieces come together, the picture becomes clear. Right now, you may only see one part of what God is doing. You may not understand why certain doors have remained closed, or why some prayers haven't been answered yet. But one day, you will look back and see how everything was working together for your good. God is never late. He is never behind schedule. He is always on time. Even when it feels like nothing is happening, He is moving. He is aligning the right opportunities, bringing the right people, and setting up the right moments. And when the time is right, everything will fall into place effortlessly. What once felt impossible will suddenly make sense. In the waiting, don't lose faith. Don't give up. Keep trusting, keep praying, and keep believing. Just because you haven't seen it yet doesn't mean it's not coming. Stay faithful where you are, and when the appointed time arrives, you will step into the blessing that has been prepared just for you. The waiting is not wasted. It is the place where God is preparing you for something greater.